Well, that sounds like blasphemy.
He's gonna hurt the
I
children.
want that man arrested immediately.
We can't do that, sir. This is America.
Sir, this is a Wendy's drive-thru.
Only thing you'll have to fear is fear itself.
Hard times. The only salvation is to be good.
Kids won't go to church
Be
anymore.
good.
The Middle Ages had some of the strangest artwork by far. There's several alchemy-related pieces of art that have hidden mushroom symbolism, images of the original creation theme with some basic mushroom occulting techniques. It seems that some of the artists had access to some really good drugs at the time. After all, they killed everyone else who had them and confiscated the medicines for themselves, right? That's what they did to the Knights Templars, the Albigensians, and the Cathars during the early 14th century, which forced those families to go underground and create secret societies years later like the Rosicrucians. The Middle Ages, or the medieval period, was filled with glamorous fairy tales and marvelous creatures like the serpent fairy Melusine from the 14th century. It's a story that revolves around a common fairy tale theme of a king's greatest fears of not having a living male heir to pass the kingship down to. Many of these fairy tales deal with changelings, which are children who are expected but never born, a common horror movie and alien impregnation mythology theme. The royal family at the time were telling people that the royals were the result of fairy offspring, and the story was told through the tale of Melusine. Images of Melusine depict her with a serpent's tail. Some of her images show that she has a direct connection with Scylla, Abraxas, Viela Laksha, and Sheila Nagig. Around the same time, we get mythologies like King Arthur and the Holy Grail. Percival went ahead and bravely captured the King's Grail cup after slaying the Red Knight. There were 3 different Grail authors at the time, and only one of them introduced the idea of the Grail cup holding the blood of fictional Jesus. What would this blood in the cup be? The same Soma juice that was discussed in the Rig Veda and pressed through a filter, the filter of which is shown in the shape of a mushroom next to a bull in early Hittite seals. When the Amanita muscaria mushroom is in its eagle phase, it then folds upward to create a cup, which becomes the phoenix phase before it dies and is reborn. This cup holds one form of the water of life in it. The rain mixing with pigments of the mushroom turn the water blood red, and this by itself is a form of the sacrament. The serpent, which represents the mushroom, is used in Christian iconography to occult the true meaning of the mushroom. This was the quest of King Arthur and the Holy Grail. It is also the core of the Hermetic works of spiritual alchemy, not chemistry, but true alchemy. Of course, Merlin the magician plays a role in all this. He was a soothsayer or seer for King Arthur. Elements of his role reveal mushroom symbolism both in the story and iconography. Vortigern was the king of the Britons and counseled by magicians to seek out Merlin the magician because Merlin was an incubi birth, a fatherless child. At one point, Merlin was about to be killed, and he told the king of a prophecy of 2 dragons. Sure enough, after excavating a pond where Merlin's blood was to be shed, 2 dragons emerged and started fighting with each other. One was red and the other was white. This became the cross of St. George and later the flag of England. This was taken directly from the Knights Templars. The red cross represents the magic mushroom. All sorts of magical creatures were also born out of the medieval period, like unicorns and dragons. Many people today believe that both of these were creatures or animals that once lived, especially since there are so many poetic recollections of them. In fact, the churches had books called bestiaries that were filled with all these marvelous creatures, like, for instance, the Romance of Alexander is a really interesting one. We can see all sorts of fantastic and marvelous artwork of strange animals and magical creatures. How about a horse that's given a throne? There's a whole cookbook on how to cook your unicorn. There was a vegetable lamb of Tartary. How odd. All of these creatures are just manifestations of the mushroom, taking over the creative mind of religious people who knew how to create mythology. St. George Slays the Dragon is probably the most popular myth fairy tale story from the Middle Ages. Lots of different artwork pieces display the secret mushroom symbolism. Even the physical architecture in Europe has mushrooms at the base. For all those who still believe dragons were real, I have a big disappointment for you. This might be a heartbreaker, but I stated many times in previous presentations that the biggest part of the key to unlocking the ancient mysteries was understanding that the bird represents the cap of the mushroom and the serpent represents the stem. Well, that's exactly what a dragon is. It's a bird serpent. Duh. The story of St. George slaying the dragon, as well as St. Margaret, both have secret mushroom symbolism in them. This is why we see dragons on royal crests, not because their families descended from dragon lords. The truth is, when you mix the color red from the Amanita muscaria and the color blue from psilocybin, you get the royal color purple. That's why purple is the color of royalty. The royal families, along with the Catholic Church, run the world not because they are specially descended from fairies or lizard people, but because they carry the secrets of the magic mushroom in their families all the way down the line back to the Roman and post-Roman era. They rule because they know these things and you don't, or at least you didn't up until now. When we think of the Dark Ages, the most common event that comes to mind were the witch trials. It's no small coincidence that the witch trials happened at a time when Europe was plunged into darkness because the church persecuted anyone who was known to use sacred herbs and plants for medicine, and most especially anyone who used the magic mushroom. When Joan of Arc was questioned during the Inquisition, she was asked what information she knew about the fairies. Fairies are code at the time for magic mushrooms. In the last presentation, the idea was put forth that virgin and human sacrifice were both covers for mushroom consumption. Allegories or metaphors. Didn't we learn as kids that witches boil children in their cauldrons to make soup so they can eat them? Isn't that the whole point of the story of Hansel and Gretel, the fairy tale filled with mushroom symbolism? How many people were killed by the Catholic Church over this persecution of plants, medicine men and women, ultimately seers, visionaries, and shaman? We don't know the exact figure, but it's estimated in the millions over a century or so. So then, why did the Catholic Church and their Christian followers commit these murderous acts? Well, the Church had a number of complaints about women and the men who helped them carry out these terrible, horrible practices like divining the future or herbal birth control or inducing abortions if necessary, copulating with devils, casting spells. But one thing we learned from the church that I find most interesting is that some women were capable of making a man's member disappear completely. Do you believe witches can do that? Well, if you believe it, it just might be true. My whole life I've been a student of the occult mysteries. I got started at 10 when I decided to test my psychic skills. It was one of the freakiest things that ever happened to me in my life, and I've been through some major weirdness, let me tell you. A year later, I was playing with Ouija boards and communicating with the dead, or so I believed at the time. My next-door neighbor was my best friend, and his family was from New Orleans, good southern black folks. My friend's mom used to tell us that she knew about voodoo, and this was all in our minds. This was when I was explaining to her that my ghost friend was throwing shit around the house on my request, and my best friend, her son, was there witnessing it with me and my mom. It's an understatement to say I've seen weird shit. It's the story of my life. I can say with very strong confidence that many people in this world are viewing things incorrectly when it comes to black magic and summoning demons. We've seen and learned how the ancient people never worshipped deities that they would ever feel compelled to sacrifice to begin with. They were not harsh, judgmental, and punishing patriarchal kings disguised as gods, remember? The scenes of sacrifice were scenes of mushroom consumption. Hollywood knows this. Just start to pay more attention and you'll see what I mean. There was never talk of these things in the ancient times, only as superstition, not any kind of art form. The grimoires and rituals are part of a show, the stage props. The real dark magic does not go on in black mass ceremonies. It goes on through a process specially developed by Hollywood, through a psyop. Children are kidnapped and tortured and raped for fun, then disposed of. I'm sure they are not sacrificed to any deities. The people who portray themselves as Satanists that are educated know it's all a show. Kids that see these things don't know the difference from a kid's magic show. They are young and naive and report back what they believe they've been through or witnessed. Children are suffering in this world and being subjected to horrible shit, but it doesn't make it any better that the people believe it's due to the influence of the bugs from planet Klendathu. We cannot communicate with deities from beyond this world. We can believe we can, and whatever we believe becomes true to a lesser or greater degree. True magicians study nature and learn from nature how energy flows. Black magic is all about using one key element, deception. Hollywood deceives you into believing black magic is conducted over pentagrams at satanic masses. Black magic is what Hollywood does, and they're the best at it by far. Those are the dark arts. Study magic and you'll see. If anyone in this world is sacrificing kids to some deity, they do it not because they're communicating with anyone, but because they're mentally disabled to begin with. The superstitious beliefs are detracting from getting the kidnapped and trafficked children the help they really need. Don't forget, it was the church who took in all the orphan children from all the male and female herbalists they murdered and made all those children slaves to the clergy with no other option. The darkest, most evil organization in the world, along with the Jesuits, along with the British royal family, Saxe, Coburg, and Gotha, and Hollywood. The Zionist Jews play a role, but it's minor compared to the role played by the Vatican and British intelligence for the crown. This concludes the presentation titled You Can't Unsee It, Episode 8, Medieval Dark Ages, the Holy Grail, and Dragons. For more information on the subject, visit ancientpsychedelia.com and check out the free online version of the book Ancient Psychedelia, Alien Gods and Mushroom Goddesses. Thanks for watching. One last thing I should mention, if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to support me in my work, here are several ways you can do that. It does help tremendously, and I really appreciate it.